I signed the papers in silence while my own son stood across the table, smiling like he had just won something. My house, my savings, my future, everything I had spent a lifetime protecting was suddenly no longer mine. They said it was for my safety. They said I was getting the best care. But that night, I watched them celebrate while I packed my life into boxes. That was the moment I realized love had been replaced by greed, and my trust had become their weapon. I did not cry. I did not scream. I started planning. Because silence, sometimes, is the first step toward revenge. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 68 years old, a widow, and I have lived alone in my coastal home in Charleston, South Carolina for nearly 20 years. My late husband built this house with his own hands, board by board, when we first moved here after retiring. Every corner of it still carries his presence. The soft creak of the wooden floors, the salt-stained windows facing the ocean, and the wide front porch where we once sat together at sunset all remind me of the life we shared. Each morning, I wake up early, brew a cup of coffee, and step onto the porch to watch the waves roll in. The ocean air fills my lungs, and for a moment, the world feels calm and predictable. I tend to my rose bushes, sweep the porch, and prepare my own meals. On Sundays, I attend church. On Wednesdays, I meet with my book club. I drive myself to the grocery store and handle my own bills. My life may be quiet, but it is mine, and I take pride in the independence I have kept. My son Ryan and his wife Ashley visit me often. Ryan is a real estate agent, smooth-talking and confident, always dressed like he is heading to an important meeting. Ashley, on the other hand, is rarely without her phone. She documents everything, from her coffee orders to the view from my porch, posting pictures online for strangers to admire. At first, their visits felt comforting. Ryan would ask about my health, and Ashley would compliment the house. But over time, their conversations began to change. Ryan started pointing out the cracks in the steps and the age of the roof. He spoke about the rising cost of insurance near the coast and the dangers of hurricane season. Ashley mentioned luxury nursing homes with ocean views and round-the-clock care, describing them as if they were resorts rather than places for the elderly. They said they were worried about my safety. They said they only wanted what was best for me. I listened politely, but something about their tone made me uneasy. I had lived here for decades without serious trouble. I knew every inch of this house, every loose board, every sound the wind made at night. This home was not just a building to me. It was where I raised my son, where I nursed my husband through his final illness, and where I learned how to live on my own after loss. It represented my memories, my strength, and my freedom. Ryan, however, spoke of it differently. He talked about its market value, its location, and how quickly it could sell. Ashley admired the view, but not the memories. She admired the potential. Despite my growing discomfort, I said nothing. I did not want to seem ungrateful. Ryan was my only child, and I had spent my life protecting him. I believed he still cared about me, even if his concerns now sounded more like business advice than family support. Still, small moments began to trouble me. Ryan would walk through the house, measuring spaces with his eyes. Ashley would take photos without asking. Their compliments felt rehearsed, and their concern felt strategic. At night, when the house was quiet, I sat alone in my living room, listening to the ocean and wondering why my own home suddenly felt like it was being evaluated instead of cherished. I reminded myself that I was strong, capable, and not ready to leave the place that held my entire life story. The house was my anchor, and I was not prepared to let go of it. If you are still watching and starting to sense that something is not quite right, please comment number 1 below to let me know you are with me. The calm you see now is only the surface, and what happens next will change everything. Now, let us move on to chapter 2. Ryan and Ashley began visiting more often. At first, I told myself it was kindness, the kind that grows when children worry about aging parents. But their conversations changed. They no longer asked about my garden or my book club. They talked about risk, danger, and responsibility. Every visit felt less like family time and more like an inspection. Ryan walked through my house with narrowed eyes, pointing out the worn steps and the uneven porch boards. He spoke about how quickly storms formed along the South Carolina coast and how fragile wooden homes could be. Ashley nodded beside him, her phone always in her hand, capturing photos of the ocean view as if she were already planning something. They spoke gently, but their words carried weight. They mentioned falls, broken bones, and the danger of living alone. They reminded me of my age in ways that felt subtle but constant. Ashley described a nursing home she had researched, calling it peaceful, luxurious, and safe. She said the residents had ocean views, daily activities, and staff available at all hours. She made it sound like a vacation resort rather than a place people went when their independence was taken away. I tried to reassure them. I told them I was careful. I told them I had lived here safely for years. But my words seemed to drift past them like the ocean mist. They had already decided what was best for me. Soon, Ryan suggested that I should not drive as much. Ashley offered to help organize my paperwork. Small offers that sounded helpful but felt controlling. My world began to shrink, not because of age, but because of their influence. One afternoon, they arrived with a man I had never seen before. He wore a neat suit and carried a leather folder. Ryan introduced him as a senior care consultant. They guided me to the dining table, placing a stack of documents in front of me. The man spoke quickly, explaining care plans, financial arrangements, and legal protections. His voice was smooth, but the words felt rushed. Ryan sat across from me, his expression calm but firm. Ashley rested her hand on my shoulder, smiling softly. They said this was for my safety. They said it was temporary. They said everything would be easier for me. The pages blurred together. I saw lines for signatures, paragraphs filled with legal language and unfamiliar terms. My head felt heavy. I wanted to ask questions, but something inside me hesitated. I had raised Ryan to be responsible. I trusted him, and in that moment, I was tired of resisting. So I signed. I did not argue. I did not protest. I signed in silence. The room felt strangely quiet afterward. The consultant packed his folder and left. Ryan looked relieved. Ashley smiled wider than before. They thanked me for trusting them. When the door closed behind them, I sat alone at the table, staring at my signature. Instead of feeling protected, I felt hollow. Something important had changed, and I could not name it. That evening, Ashley posted a photo online. She was holding a glass of wine, smiling beside Ryan, with the ocean glowing behind them. The caption spoke of new beginnings and exciting changes. I stood on my porch and watched the waves roll in. The same view I had cherished for decades now felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. The house, once my refuge, felt unfamiliar. For the first time in my life, I felt like a guest in my own home. My instincts whispered that this was not about my safety. This was about my house. And something far more valuable than my comfort was being taken from me. If you are still here and feeling that the pressure is starting to build, comment number 2 so I know you are following the story. What comes next is where silence turns into shock and the truth begins to reveal itself. Let us continue to chapter 3. I woke up the morning after signing the papers with a strange heaviness in my chest. The house was quiet, but it did not feel peaceful. The ocean breeze still drifted through the open windows, and the floors still creaked the way they always had, yet something felt different. It was as if the walls themselves were waiting for something I did not understand. By mid-morning, Ryan's car pulled into the driveway. Ashley stepped out beside him, and to my surprise, they were not alone. 2 large cardboard boxes sat in the back seat. They did not knock. They walked in like they owned the place. Ryan moved quickly, lifting items from shelves and placing them into the boxes. Ashley followed behind him, sorting through drawers and cabinets. They did not ask me what I wanted to keep. They did not ask me where anything should go. They packed my wedding tea set, the one my husband and I received 40 years ago. They stacked my old photo albums. They even took the handwritten letters my husband had written to me during his final months. When I reached for one of them, Ashley gently moved my hand away and said I would not need these anymore. In that moment, I felt invisible. My life was being folded into boxes without my permission. After they left, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by empty spaces where my memories had once been. I tried to convince myself that this was only temporary, that they were helping me prepare for something better. But my heart knew better. Later that afternoon, I checked my bank account. My hands shook as the screen loaded. $62,000 were gone. My savings, the money I had carefully built over decades, had vanished. When I asked Ryan about it, he told me it had been moved for my care. He said it was safer this way. He spoke calmly, as if this was a normal family decision, but nothing about it felt normal. That evening, I found another document on the dining table. My name was no longer listed as the owner of the house. Ryan's name was there instead. My home, the place where I had lived, loved, and grieved, no longer legally belonged to me. I felt dizzy. I sat down and stared at the paper for a long time, trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. The next day, Ryan informed me that I would be moving into the nursing home in 5 days. He spoke about it as if it were already done. He explained that the house would be sold soon after. There was no room for discussion. There was no room for my feelings. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry, but I did neither. Instead, I stayed quiet. I watched how Ryan avoided my eyes. I watched how Ashley smiled too easily. I listened to every word they said and memorized every detail of their plans. My fear slowly transformed into something stronger, something sharper. They thought my silence meant obedience. They were wrong. That night, I walked through each room of the house. I touched the door frames my husband had built. I stood in the kitchen where we once danced to old songs. I sat on the porch and listened to the waves crash against the shore. This house was my story, and I was not ready to let someone else erase it. I realized then that I had been deceived. The people I trusted most had taken advantage of my love, my age, and my silence. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. But I was not weak. I was observant. I was patient. And I was preparing. The first shock had passed. Now, It was time to protect what was still mine. If you are still watching and wondering how far this situation can go, comment number 3 below. The next chapter introduces a secret that changes everything and proves this was never just a family issue. Let us move on to chapter 4. The shock of what Ryan and Ashley had done did not fade overnight. It followed me through every room of the house, clinging to the walls like damp air before a storm. I tried to stay calm, but my thoughts kept circling the same questions. How had my life changed so quickly? How had my own son taken control of everything without my consent? I knew I could not face this alone. So I walked next door to see Helen Brooks, my neighbor of more than 30 years. Helen had watched me grow older in this house, had known my husband, and had shared countless cups of coffee with me over the years. If anyone would understand, it was her. We sat in her living room, and I told her everything. I explained how Ryan had brought the consultant, how I had signed the papers, how my money and my house were no longer mine. Helen listened without interrupting. Her expression grew darker with every detail. When I finished, she surprised me with something I had never expected. Helen told me that Ashley had once been involved in a real estate scandal in Florida. It had not made the news, but people in certain circles knew about it. Ashley had allegedly helped manipulate property deals, taking advantage of older homeowners. The case had been settled quietly with money, and her name had been kept out of public records. My stomach tightened. This was not just about my son being misguided. This was about a pattern of behavior. Ashley had done this before, and now she was doing it again. Only this time, the victim was me. For the first time, I understood that I was not dealing with a family misunderstanding. I was dealing with calculated manipulation. Helen urged me to seek legal help. She mentioned a lawyer named Rebecca Turner who specialized in elder rights. With trembling hands, I agreed. The next day, Helen drove me to Rebecca's office. Rebecca was calm, focused, and direct. She listened carefully as I described everything that had happened. She asked for details about the documents, the bank transfers, and the nursing home plans. She did not rush me or dismiss my concerns. She told me there were clear signs of financial exploitation and undue influence. She explained that what Ryan and Ashley had done was not just morally wrong, but potentially illegal. Rebecca advised me to gather every document I could find: bank statements, property records, any messages or emails that showed their intentions. She said we would need evidence to protect my rights and stop the sale of the house. As I listened, fear mixed with determination. I was afraid of what Ryan might do when he realized I was fighting back. I was afraid of being labeled as confused or incapable, but the fear of losing my independence was stronger than all the others. This house was not just a building. It was the proof of my life, my marriage, my strength after loss. I refused to let it be taken from me without a fight. That evening, I returned home with a new sense of purpose. I carefully searched through drawers, folders, and old files. I found copies of bank statements and letters from the nursing home. Each piece of paper felt like a small weapon in a battle I never wanted to fight. The silence I had once used to survive was no longer enough. I realized that staying quiet had only made me vulnerable. My trust had been used against me. But now, I was learning how to protect myself. I was still scared. I still loved my son. And part of me wished this nightmare would simply disappear. But reality had already changed my life, so I changed with it. I was no longer just a mother trying to keep the peace. I was a woman preparing to defend her future. If you are still with me and feeling the tension rising, comment number 4 so I know you are here. The next chapter is where control turns into confrontation and the real battle begins. Let us continue to chapter 5. Ryan did not give me much time to adjust to the reality he had created. Only 2 days after my meeting with Rebecca Turner, he arrived at my house with a new plan. He informed me that my move to the nursing home would happen sooner than expected. Everything, he said, had already been arranged. Transportation, paperwork, and room assignment were all confirmed. There was no mention of my opinion. He insisted that I visit the facility that afternoon so I could feel comfortable before the move. I agreed, not because I wanted to go, but because I needed to see what they were preparing for me. The nursing home was modern and spotless, with polished floors and soft lighting. The walls were decorated with cheerful artwork, and the staff greeted us with polite smiles. On the surface, it looked pleasant enough, but the atmosphere felt cold to me, like a place designed for efficiency rather than comfort. As we walked through the hallways, I noticed the residents. Many sat silently in wheelchairs, staring at televisions or out windows. Their eyes looked distant, as if the world had slowly faded away from them. I felt a tightening in my chest. A nurse approached us and asked a few questions about my health. When I answered clearly and confidently, she seemed surprised. She glanced at Ryan with a puzzled expression, then back at me. I could tell she was not expecting someone as alert and independent as I was. The room they showed me was clean but small. A single bed, a dresser, and a narrow window facing a parking lot. No ocean view, no garden, no space for the memories that defined my life. Ryan spoke about safety and convenience, but his voice sounded impatient. He wanted this process to move quickly. Ashley stood beside him, nodding, her expression carefully sympathetic. She spoke about how much easier my life would be here, how I would not have to worry about anything anymore. But I did worry. I worried about losing my freedom. I worried about losing my voice. And most of all, I worried about losing my home. When I hesitated, Ryan's calm tone began to crack. His frustration slipped through his carefully controlled words. He reminded me of my age and the risks of living alone. He spoke as if my independence were a problem that needed to be solved. Ashley played her role well. Her eyes filled with tears, and she spoke about how much stress the situation had caused them. She claimed they were only trying to protect me, that every decision had been made out of love. But something about her performance felt rehearsed. As we left the building, I felt like I was being escorted away from my own life. The visit had not comforted me. It had confirmed my fears. That evening, I contacted Rebecca Turner and told her everything. I explained how Ryan was rushing the move and how little control I had over the situation. Rebecca listened carefully and assured me that we still had options, but we would need to act quickly. The next few days passed in a tense silence. Ryan continued to push forward with his plans. Ashley continued to speak softly and smile politely, but behind their expressions I could feel the pressure building. I began to understand the truth. This was not about my safety. This was not about my comfort. This was about my property. They were not preparing a place for me to live. They were preparing my life to disappear. At night, I walked through my house, touching the walls, the furniture, the door frames my husband had built. Every step reminded me of what I stood to lose. The sound of the ocean, once comforting, now felt like a reminder of how fragile my peace had become. I realized that if I did not fight now, I would soon be living in a small room with nothing but memories and regrets. The situation had reached its breaking point. The quiet manipulation had turned into open control, and I was no longer willing to accept it. The tension inside my home grew heavier with each passing day. Ryan and Ashley moved through the rooms as if they were already in charge of everything. They spoke quietly, exchanged looks, and made decisions without asking me. Even simple things, like when I ate or where I sat, seemed to be influenced by their presence. My house no longer felt like a place of comfort. It felt like a space under observation. One afternoon, while I was in the hallway near the kitchen, I heard Ryan's voice coming from the living room. He was on the phone. At first, I paid no attention, but then his tone changed. It was colder, sharper, and more confident than the voice he used with me. He was speaking to someone about the sale of my house. He said that once the property was sold, I would remain in the nursing home permanently. He spoke as if my future had already been decided. There was no mention of my wishes, my independence, or my life. I stood still, my heart pounding in my chest. Every word felt like a knife cutting through the last pieces of trust I had left. In that moment, I understood the truth. This was not about care. This was not about safety. This was about control. The son I had raised with patience and love had become someone I barely recognized. I remembered the little boy who used to hold my hand when he crossed the street, who cried when he scraped his knee, and who once promised to take care of me when I grew old. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who saw me as an obstacle to his plans. I returned to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands trembled, but my mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. Grief washed over me, not just for the situation, but for the relationship I had lost. Loving someone did not mean allowing them to take everything from me. I knew then that there would be no peaceful resolution. No gentle conversation could undo what had already been done. The only path forward was action. That evening, I contacted Rebecca Turner and told her exactly what I had heard. I explained Ryan's plan and how certain he sounded about my permanent placement in the nursing home. Rebecca listened carefully and assured me that this information was critical. She said we needed to move quickly before the sale of the house progressed any further. Over the next day, I gathered every document I could find. Bank statements, property records, and letters from the nursing home were placed neatly into a folder. Each piece of paper represented a part of my life that someone else had tried to take from me. I felt afraid, but I also felt something stronger. I felt determined. Ryan and Ashley still acted as if they were in control, but I saw them differently now. Their smiles looked rehearsed. Their concern sounded hollow. I no longer searched their faces for kindness. I searched for truth. Late at night, I walked through my home one more time. I ran my fingers along the door frames, touched the furniture my husband had chosen, and stood on the porch listening to the ocean. This house had been my refuge for years. It had witnessed my joys and my losses. It deserved to remain in my care. And so did I. I was no longer willing to stay silent. I was no longer willing to be patient. I was no longer willing to be controlled. The choice had been made. I would fight for my home. I would fight for my independence. And I would fight for myself. If you are still watching and just heard the truth come out, comment number 6 to show you are locked in. What happens next is the fallout, and the consequences will hit harder than anyone expected. Now, let us move on to Chapter 7. The letter from Rebecca Turner arrived on a Tuesday morning. It confirmed what I had hoped for and feared at the same time. The sale of my house had been frozen. The financial transfers were under review. My rights were finally being acknowledged. Ryan received the same notice that afternoon. His reaction was immediate. He arrived at my house with a sharp expression and a rigid posture. The calm, concerned tone he once used was gone. In its place was a cold irritation. He accused me of creating unnecessary trouble. He said I was confused, emotional, and being manipulated by outsiders. His words were no longer about care, they were about control. Ashley followed a different strategy. She did not confront me directly. Instead, she began speaking to people in the community. At church, at social gatherings, and through messages, She described me as fragile and forgetful. She implied that I could not manage my own affairs anymore. She painted a picture of a worried family trying to protect an unstable elderly woman. Soon, I noticed the change. Some neighbors looked at me differently. A few friends asked gentle questions about my health. Their concern was sincere, but it hurt to realize how quickly doubt could spread. I felt exposed, as if my private life had been placed on display. Ryan did not stop there. He hired his own attorney. The goal was clear. He wanted to prove that I was mentally unfit to make decisions for myself. If he succeeded, my voice would be taken away entirely. The pressure was overwhelming. At night, I lay awake listening to the ocean and wondering if I would be forced into a place I did not belong. I feared losing my home, my independence, and my identity. But I also knew that fear could not guide my choices. Helen remained by my side. She brought meals, kept me company, and reminded me that I was not alone. Rebecca Turner called regularly, updating me on every legal step. She explained the process carefully, ensuring I understood what was happening and what to expect. For the first time, I began speaking openly about my situation. I told trusted friends the truth. I explained how my money had been taken, how my house had been transferred, and how my consent had been manipulated. I refused to let Ryan control the narrative any longer. Each conversation felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The rumors did not disappear, but neither did my resolve. I learned to stand taller when people questioned me. I learned to answer calmly when doubt appeared in their eyes. I reminded myself that my clarity did not need to be proven to anyone except the law. Inside, something shifted. I was no longer the woman who stayed silent to keep peace. I was no longer the mother who protected her son at her own expense. I was a woman protecting her future. The upcoming hearing loomed over everything. It represented risk, confrontation, and truth. Ryan was preparing his case. Ashley was preparing her story, and I was preparing my strength. I walked through my house one evening, touching the walls and the door frames. Each surface held a memory. Each room reminded me of who I was before control and manipulation entered my life. This was my home. This was my story, and I would not let it be rewritten by someone else. No matter how loud their accusations became, I had chosen my path. I was ready to face the consequences. The days leading up to the hearing were filled with quiet preparation. Rebecca Turner and I spent hours reviewing documents, organizing bank records, and studying the timeline of events that had led to my loss of control. Every transfer, every signature, and every rushed decision was carefully documented. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt something close to confidence. I was still nervous, of course. The idea of standing in a courtroom while my own son questioned my competence was painful. But I also knew that the truth was on my side. I had lived independently for years. I had managed my finances responsibly. And I had never agreed to give up my life the way Ryan and Ashley claimed. On the morning of the hearing, the air felt heavy with anticipation. The courtroom was quiet and formal, filled with polished wood and muted voices. Ryan and Ashley sat across from me with their attorney. They avoided my eyes. Their confidence, once so strong, now seemed strained. Their lawyer repeated the same claims I had heard before. They described me as confused, fragile, and unable to make sound decisions. They painted a picture of a worried family trying to protect an aging mother who no longer understood what was best for her. Listening to them speak about me that way felt like being erased. Then something unexpected happened. A nurse from the nursing home stood up to testify. I recognized her from my earlier visit. She spoke calmly and clearly, explaining that Ryan had once approached her with an offer of money. He wanted assurance that I would remain in the facility for an extended period, regardless of my condition or wishes. Her words changed the atmosphere in the room. The judge's expression shifted, Ryan's posture stiffened, Ashley's carefully controlled appearance faltered. For the first time, their narrative began to unravel. Rebecca Turner seized the moment. She connected the nurse's testimony to the financial transfers and the rushed paperwork. She explained how the plan had not been about care, but about control, about securing my house and my money by removing my ability to resist. I sat quietly, listening as the story of my own life was finally told with honesty. The court reviewed the evidence carefully. Bank statements showed personal spending. Property records showed my home had been transferred without proper explanation. And now, the nurse's testimony revealed an attempt to keep me confined for convenience. The truth was no longer hidden. As the proceedings continued, I felt a shift inside myself. The fear that had once weighed so heavily on my chest began to loosen. I was no longer standing alone against my son. The law was standing with me. For weeks, I had been treated as a problem to be managed, a burden to be controlled. But in that courtroom, I was seen as a person again, a capable woman with the right to make her own choices. When the hearing ended for the day, Rebecca gave me a reassuring nod. We had not reached a final decision yet, but the direction was clear. The truth had finally entered the room. I stepped outside into the sunlight and took a deep breath. The ocean breeze carried the familiar scent of salt and freedom. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. This battle was not over. There were still legal steps ahead, still challenges to face, but I was no longer fighting in the dark. The lies had been exposed. The manipulation had been revealed, and I had found a way forward. If you are still here and ready to see how everything finally unfolds, comment number 8 below. The truth has surfaced. The fight is nearly over, and the ending may surprise you. Let us move on to the final chapter. The day of the final ruling arrived quietly, almost too quietly for the weight it carried. I sat in the courtroom with my hands folded in my lap, listening to the steady hum of voices and the soft shuffle of papers. My heart was calm, but my thoughts were loud. Everything I had endured, every fear and every sleepless night had led to this moment. Ryan and Ashley sat across from me. They looked different now. The confidence that once filled their posture was gone. Their expressions were tense, their movements cautious. For the first time, they seemed unsure of the control they had worked so hard to claim. When the judge began to speak, the room fell silent. The court confirmed that I was fully capable of managing my own affairs. The transfer of my house and the movement of my money had been done without proper consent and under undue influence. The actions taken against me were recognized as financial exploitation of an elderly person. My home was legally returned to me. My bank accounts were restored. My rights were protected. The words felt unreal at first, as if I were listening to someone else's story. But as the ruling continued, I felt a deep sense of release settle in my chest. I was no longer fighting to be heard. I had been heard. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order. Ryan and Ashley were not allowed to contact me or come near my property. Any communication would have to go through legal channels. The decision was firm and final. I did not look at them as they stood. I did not need to. The chapter of my life that included their control had come to an end. The consequences for them followed quickly. Ryan lost his position in the real estate field. His involvement in my case raised serious questions about his ethics and professional conduct. Ashley's past was brought back into the light, and investigations into her previous actions were reopened. As for me, I returned home. When I stepped through my front door, The familiar scent of ocean air and polished wood greeted me. The house felt different now, not changed, but reclaimed. The walls no longer carried tension. The silence no longer felt heavy. I walked through each room slowly, letting the memories settle back into their rightful place. The living room, where I had laughed with my husband. The kitchen, where I had shared countless meals. The porch, where I had watched the sun rise and fall for years. This time, there was no fear attached to those memories, only peace. I did not feel anger. I did not feel triumph. What I felt was clarity. I had protected what mattered most, not just my property, but my independence, my voice, and my dignity. For the first time in months, I slept without worry. The battle was over. The truth had won. And my life, finally, was my own again. Life after the court ruling did not return to what it once was. It became something better. The silence in my home no longer felt heavy or uncertain. It felt peaceful. Each morning I opened my windows to the ocean breeze and allowed the sound of the waves to remind me that I was still here, still in control, and still capable of shaping my own future. I returned to the routines that had once brought me comfort. I tended to my garden, trimming the rose bushes my husband had planted years ago. Their blossoms grew fuller that season, as if the house itself had begun to heal. I attended church without worrying about who might be watching or what rumors might be spreading. I joined my book club again and found joy in simple conversations that had nothing to do with legal battles or family conflict. My life felt lighter. There were moments when I thought about Ryan, not with anger and not with sorrow, but with a quiet understanding. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. I no longer carried the weight of trying to fix what could not be repaired. Love, I learned, does not mean surrendering your dignity. It does not mean sacrificing your future to protect someone who refuses to respect it. For years, I believed that silence was a form of strength. I believed that keeping peace was more important than speaking up. But silence had allowed others to speak for me, to decide for me, and to take from me. Finding my voice was not easy, but it saved me. I discovered a new confidence in myself. I began volunteering at a local community center, helping other older adults learn how to manage their finances and understand their legal rights. Many of them shared stories that sounded painfully familiar. Children who pressured them, relatives who promised care but delivered control, fear that kept them quiet. I told them what I had learned. Age does not make you powerless. Trust should never cost you your freedom, and your voice still matters, no matter how old you are. There were days when I simply sat on my porch and watched the horizon change colors as the sun set over the water. The ocean had not changed, but I had. Where I once saw uncertainty, I now saw possibility. Where I once felt small, I now felt steady. My home was no longer just a place filled with memories. It was a symbol of what I had protected: my independence, my history, my right to live life on my own terms. I did not seek revenge. I did not celebrate the downfall of others. What I celebrated was my survival. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and fear, and I had come out stronger. Some nights, I reflected on the woman I used to be, the one who signed documents without asking questions, the one who trusted without hesitation. That woman was not weak. She was kind. But kindness must walk beside awareness, or it becomes a vulnerability. Now, I understood the balance. My story was not about losing family. It was about finding myself. The world often tells older women to be quiet, to step aside, to accept what is given. But I learned that acceptance does not mean surrender. It means choosing what you are willing to allow and what you are not. I chose myself. And in doing so, I reclaimed everything that truly mattered. The ocean still sings its endless song outside my window. The roses still bloom in the garden. And my life, once shaken by betrayal, now rests in the steady comfort of self-respect. This is not the end of my story. It is the beginning of living it fully. Sometimes the hardest battles are not fought in courtrooms or conversations, but within our own hearts. We learn, often too late, that silence can feel safe while slowly taking our power away. Yet when we choose to stand for ourselves, we reclaim more than what was taken. We reclaim our dignity, our voice, and our future. Life has a way of testing us through the people we trust most. But those tests can become turning points, reminding us that independence has no expiration date and self-respect is never optional. Strength does not always look loud. Sometimes it looks like quiet resolve, steady courage, and the decision to protect what matters most. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments and let others know they are not alone. Thank you for listening. Please like, follow, and subscribe for more stories.